A healthy democracy relies on friction. Citizens need a mechanism to organize, pool their influence, and apply targeted pressure to the machinery of the state. But modern legal frameworks treat nearly every group of politically active citizens the exact same way they treat massive traditional political parties. When a grassroots group lacks structural boundaries, its operating logic shifts. The initial goal, solving a specific societal problem, is gradually replaced by the need to sustain the organization itself and accumulate influence. Over time, fluid activist groups harden. They evolve into permanent, bloated clientelist networks, hierarchies of leaders, local bosses, and foot soldiers that trade political favors for loyalty, ultimately clogging the very system they set out to fix. Without an engineered expiration date, the mechanics of power guarantee a predictable outcome. The outsiders inevitably morph into the establishment they originally formed to fight. To break this cycle of institutional rot, we have to stop treating all political groups as identical entities. The legal architecture needs to enforce two entirely separate categories of organization. The first is the political movement, a legal entity engineered strictly for temporary, surgical problem solving. The second is the political NGO, a non-governmental organization engineered strictly for permanent, firewalled observation. By bifurcating these structures, we can build a self-cleaning political system. We create entities equipped to check the state's power, but geometrically immune to its corrupting gravity. Under this framework, a political movement isn't a political party in waiting. It is a strictly temporary organization. Legally, a movement can have exactly one measurable objective in its political program, nothing else. It must also establish a predetermined, unalterable lifespan at the exact moment of its founding. Because its scope is narrow, the movement operates with a fraction of the state funding granted to a traditional party, forcing it to channel all its resources toward that singular target. By legally restricting an organization to a single goal and a ticking clock, the structure prevents the sprawling, multi-issue platforms that traditionally breed clientelism and patronage. This structure contains three exit conditions. First, the moment the movement's single goal is achieved, the organization legally dissolves. Second, if the predetermined tenure hits zero before the goal is reached, the movement is automatically dismantled. Third, the group can formally trigger a procedure to convert into a traditional political party, instantly subjecting itself to a much broader, heavier set of regulations. To prevent these movements from hoarding passive members just to simulate influence, the system relies on a financial negative feedback loop. To run in an election, the movement must pay a financial deposit, calculated using the local average income and the total number of voters in that district. This chart illustrates the deposit recovery threshold. A candidate must win a specific multiple of votes based directly on their total registered member count. Furthermore, that required vote threshold multiplies again by the number of years remaining on the movement's timer. Movements are mathematically penalized for artificially inflating their ranks or setting unnecessarily long lifespans. The math forces them to remain lean, fast, and entirely focused on the finish line. The second category in this framework addresses organizations that monitor elections and engage in political life, but do not seek to govern. If an independent group acts as a control body or shapes political discourse, it must formally register as a political NGO. That registration triggers an absolute firewall. The organization and its members are permanently barred from holding executive or legislative power. Information flows outward. NGOs are granted access to audit the state, but power can never flow backward into the NGO. You cannot objectively referee the match if you are simultaneously trying to score goals. While barred from the executive branch, individual NGO members can be elected to the judicial system or a dedicated control branch. But the exact moment an individual is elected to a control role, their NGO membership is immediately and legally severed. This strict off-ramp ensures that NGOs do not evolve into shadow power brokers, pulling strings through loyal proxies embedded within the justice system. The state receives a steady pipeline of highly trained auditing talent, and the NGOs themselves remain structurally isolated and impartial. Zooming out, we can see how this architecture functions at scale. Temporary movements act as surgical tools. They emerge to solve highly specific friction points within the state, hit their targets, and dissolve before they can calcify into corrupt networks. Meanwhile, political NGOs operate safely behind their firewalls, maintaining a constant, objective perimeter watch over the executive machinery. By refusing to lump all political groups under a single, flawed legal definition, the system optimizes each entity for a highly specific, naturally limited function. The temporary movement fixes a single issue and vanishes. The political NGO observes power without ever wielding it, acting strictly as a training ground for future auditors. A healthy political ecosystem cannot rely on the good intentions of the people operating within it. True accountability has to be built directly into the architectural geometry of the organizations themselves.